for pork.
Grandpa, look!
I'm teaching my grandson to respect nature. Don't touch. The way my granddad taught me. That's why we eat a cereal made with respect for nature. Grape nuts. You see, only grape nuts is a blend of wheat and barley, prepared simply to bring out its goodness and the good taste nature gave it.
Tastes nutty, crunchy.
The way it ought to be. Just feels good that we eat a cereal with respect for nature. Grape nut cereal.
Saturday, the Angels head for the hills and start running moonshine when they move to a new night.
Don't want to buy a Curtis Mathes TV just yet? Okay, rent one instead. That's right, rent. And enjoy the same Curtis Mathes quality you'd get if you'd bought. Choose from consoles, portables, home entertainment centers, all with 100% modular design. What you don't get is a long-term obligation. Curtis Mathes, the most expensive television in America. And now you can rent it.
$10 delivers. Call now, 333-0300 for immediate delivery.
Dear Care Unit, my name is Debbie. I am 15 and my dad has a drinking problem. Every night after work, he goes straight to the bars. And when he comes home, he and Mother fight. I love them too much to let them do this to themselves. Please help me and my sisters.
For help or information, call the Care Unit program at 868-7010. That's 868-7010.
A truly fresh beginning for our new president. The hostages are coming home. The stories from Washington and Memphis tonight at 6 here on TV2's News Watch.
You're watching WNGE TV2 Nashville.
ABC News live coverage of Inauguration 81 continues. This portion brought to you by Johnson & Johnson, where quality products for the American family have been a tradition for generations.
And there is the crowd, and there is the president greeting the crowd. The motorcade has now turned off the Capitol Plaza and is on Constitution Avenue, heading down toward Pennsylvania Avenue. And that shot that we had a moment ago gives you an idea of the crowd. It is really quite large, quite large. We understand it's at least 100,000 or so gathered along the route. And as Joe Benton pointed out, many of them have been there for quite some time. We have moved our correspondent Charles Gibson away from the horses now, and he is with the people along the parade route, so we're going to go to him for a report. Charlie?
Craig, we're in the two-legged groups now, and we are standing on Constitution Avenue waiting for the president to approach us. As you mentioned, the crowd is very big around here. It is 10 or 12 deep. And I think that's interesting because we're at First and Constitution, and you don't know the full geography of Washington, but at this point, the people who are standing here will only see the presidential escort and the groups that are preceding the president, and they will not actually see anything more than the president and the presidential escort. They will not see the parade itself. So this crowd of 10 or 12 deep are the Reagan diehards, in effect. They are the people who are here to see primarily the president, the new president, and not to see the parade itself, although presumably they will have time to move up to Pennsylvania Avenue a little bit and perhaps see some of the parade itself as it starts in its formative stages. This pace, obviously, very slow. They go at about walking pace. Everybody here trying to get a good look at the president. Everybody telling us to duck down because they've been standing here rather patiently for a long time, and they have a right to be aggrieved when we come and stand, I'm afraid, right in front of them so that we can get a better look as the president proceeds up Constitution Avenue. And some of the office buildings along here that you will see are packed. I don't suppose the Department of Labor is absolutely the plum jobs of Washington, but it's a building right along the route, and as we walk by the Department of Labor, where the president will pass in a few moments, each window is packed, the roof is packed, and there are plenty of people who have jockeyed for good position to see this parade as it goes by. This crowd very quiet, but at the moment, not only do we block them, but the press trucks that are in front of the president-elect block them, and they are still about, I would guess, a block away from us, and we still have not yet been able to get a good look, at least from this vantage point, at the new president.
Okay, thank you, Charlie. The parade is still, or the motorcade, I should say, is still on Constitution Avenue. They have not yet reached Pennsylvania, where the actual parade will proceed. And because really there is not much to see except this crowded mass and none of the spectacular marching units and the horses and so forth, we are going to take time to bring you up to date briefly on the news of the day. The big news, of course, the release of the hostages, the inauguration of a new president. What a day it is, January 20th, 1981. But there are some things happening in the world, and we'd like to bring you the latest right now. So we're going to pause briefly for a brief report on the news from ABC News.
Good afternoon. Shortly after his inauguration today, President Ronald Reagan announced that the 52 freed American hostages had left Tehran about 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time. A short time later, it was confirmed that they had left Iranian airspace aboard 2 Algerian airliners. After a refueling stop that is expected to be at a U.S. air base outside Athens, Greece, the hostages and former hostages are expected to land in Algiers at 7 this evening Eastern Time. 2 special U.S. Air Force medical evacuation planes will then take them to West Germany, where they will be greeted by former President Jimmy Carter. So after 444 days, the 52 Americans are free, and tonight, while the inaugural balls are in full swing, we expect to broadcast pictures of the freed Americans in West Germany. Now this.
Washed in detergent alone. Washed in detergent plus Clorox bleach. Detergent alone can't give you the clean that Clorox can.
That's a very informal news brief. Now stay tuned for continuing coverage of the inauguration and the latest on the freed Americans. Let's go back now to my colleague Frank Reynolds on Capitol Hill. Frank?
Thank you, Ted. Had I known that you were going to deliver that news brief, I certainly would have given you the proper introduction. But we've been very, very lucky to be able to have you there manning that watch post to keep track of what's been going on in the hostage situation and what good news it has been to report. Here is the president. I almost said the president-elect, but the president and Mrs. Reagan back up now on their feet through the open roof of the car and waving to the crowd as they move down the avenue. Barbara Walters is down at the anchor booth just across the street from the White House in Lafayette Park. And she has a guest who will play a very important role in this new administration. So we're going to go to Barbara now. Barbara?
That's right, Frank. Our guest has had her job now for 1 full week today. She is Sheila Patton, and she is Nancy Reagan's press secretary. Mrs. Patton had worked for Hill & Knowlton, which is, I think, the largest public relations firm in the country. She has 2 children, 7 and 10, and I was just told by Mrs. Patton that the 7-year-old has chicken pox, so I'm not going to sit too close. Mrs. Patton, we had said earlier that Nancy Reagan had said to you, look, I'd like to get down to something more substantial. What is the first thing you're going to do? Is she going to try to find a program to commit herself to? How does it work?
Well, for years, Mrs. Reagan has been involved in a program called Foster Grandparents, which pairs a senior citizen with a child who's either emotionally or physically handicapped, and I understand often institutionalized. We're hoping to, in her new role as First Lady, to continue her involvement in that program to some degree. And then she's also expressed a great interest in the problem of youth abuse in the areas of alcohol and drugs. And so we're going to look at that whole area to see how she might best have an impact.
So you really have to sort through a lot of things and say, this is what the interest is, now let's see where she can best
exactly.
put her energy
We're going to explore beginning with her interests.
But she wants to be more than wife and mother, because remember before the election we heard, well, she's not going to go to cabinet meetings. Her major desire in life is to be a good wife and mother. Now she has to take on a little more.
Well, I think the country expects that of the First Lady.
Can we go into a little bit of the criticism, because you've had to handle some of it? One of the questions about Mrs. Reagan's gown, that she's wearing a gown tonight at the gala that's hand-beaded, that would ordinarily cost $10,000, made by the most expensive designer in this country, Galanos. And people are saying, couldn't she find something a little less expensive?
Well, that gown was donated by James Galanos, and will be immediately after she's worn it, we'll be turning around and donating it to the Smithsonian for the display of First Lady's gown. So I'm glad to have the opportunity, because she was concerned that Mr. Galanos, in fairness to him, that that kind of information ought to be known.
So it isn't that she's been madly extravagant with her gowns
Not at all.
and shoes
Not at
and
all.
so on. What about what she's going to be doing in the White House? There had been some reports that she was going to come in and redecorate and maybe even tear down walls, and you had said to me, look, that's just false. That's not.
Well, every first family makes changes in their private living quarters to suit their lifestyle, and the Reagans will be making some changes. They're bringing furniture with them from California.
What?
I only know what I've read in terms of the pieces. I understand they're pieces that they love and are comfortable with, and a new bed that they've purchased.
But as far as doing over the public rooms, does Mrs. Reagan have any plans to do that?
Not to my knowledge at this point.
There had been some problems with finding, a press secretary for Mrs. Reagan. There had been a press secretary. She hadn't worked out. You've had a good deal of experience, and everyone seems to be very comfortable, both the Reagans and the press, with the fact that you are going to be the press secretary. Has any of this background turmoil disturbed you?
No, I'm intent that my job began this week, and I'm starting fresh and really looking forward to it. I've already had a great deal of fun this week.
What kind of press do you think Mrs. Reagan has had? Up until last week, you didn't know you were going to be the press secretary. How do you think it's been?
I think so. It's been difficult. First of all, this is a transition period, and it's difficult to characterize or to learn the depth of any person in a time like this. But I anticipate that once she's in the White House and once we're able to get a look at the program she wants to be involved in, that the essence of Mrs. Reagan is going to come through. And Mrs. Reagan is a wonderful, marvelous lady.
Isn't that nice that you feel this way? And she certainly seems warm and gracious and happy today. We wish you luck, Sheila Patton. I'm sure over the years we'll all be seeing a good deal of you and working with you. And thank you for coming with us
Thank you. I've
today.
enjoyed it.
Thank you. We'll go back to Frank now at the Capitol.
All right, thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Mrs. Patton. The parade, I believe, has moved on to Pennsylvania Avenue now. Here is the President and Mrs. Reagan still up in the, yes, they just moved on to Constitution, or to Pennsylvania Avenue. And now the crowd that has lined the route along this famous street is waiting for them to come by so they can give their salute. And we're going to bring on Mike Von Fremd, who is among the crowd. Go, Mike.
Almost conservative. There seems to be people packed about 12, 14 deep. And your participation in this pomp really depends upon your circumstances. Here at 9th and Pennsylvania Avenue, only the people in the front row are now getting a glimpse of anything. There's a number of military officials walking up, people in red hats. There's some flags waving. But the ones that are back 10 and 12 deep, well, they've got to fight. They're fighting for a position to see. So far, Mr. Reagan seems quite a ways back. At 9th and Pennsylvania Avenue, he will be passing by the National Archives. Oh, now we can see a long line of black limos coming up. And Mr. Reagan, who's intent upon returning the elegant style and the old signs of power to Washington, such as the long black limos and the designer fashions, will be waving to a crowd here at 9th and Pennsylvania Avenue that will be dressed mostly in their comfortable blue jeans. Okay, and we're still about 2 minutes away from him passing by here, Frank, and the crowd is getting very anxious. Back to you.
All right, Mike, I know you won't miss him as he goes by. I'd like to show you just briefly here the scene at the Capitol at the West Front, because the ceremonies are rapidly leaving us here at the West Front, which just a short while ago was the centerpiece of the whole thing. Now the musicians' chairs have been folded up, and the workmen are already beginning to dismantle whatever temporary arrangements have been made. We might point out, however, that while the pageantry has ended as far as Capitol Hill is concerned, the work really goes on here, the important business of the government. The Senate has gone into session this afternoon to take up the cabinet confirmations that President Reagan signed immediately after taking the oath of office and then formally submitted to the Senate in accordance with the constitutional procedure. We understand the Senate is debating at the moment, or is considering, the nomination of Caspar Weinberger to be Secretary of Defense. There will be no problem on that score. Then they're going to take up the nomination of Alexander Haig to be Secretary of State. And there may well be some debate on that nomination because, of course, General Alexander Haig was the subject of some 5 days of confirmation hearings, sometimes acrimonious ones, in the period of just a couple of weeks ago. And they do not expect to finish on that today. So he'll have at least a Secretary of Defense, but he may not yet have a Secretary of State by the time he goes to bed tonight. George Will, I know that you have been given an invitation that you simply cannot turn down, so you're going to have to leave us. Give us your thoughts on how this day has gone.
Well, it's been a splendid day. It's been blessed in the weather so far. Sandy and I were talking about previous inaugurals, and I believe it was when Grant was inaugurated in '73. It was 16 above. There was a 40-degree wind, and the champagne froze at the inaugural balls. So it's they've been blessed. It may rain now, but the government is going to go on, and I really shudder to think what the visitors make of Washington when they come here and they see all the limousines out all at once, and the assault going on our livers and other senses because of all the celebrating.
Envy, raw envy.
Do you think?
Yes.
Well, they should know that this too shall pass, and it will pass quickly tomorrow morning.
Yes, I suppose so. Well, thank you very much, George. We've enjoyed having you with us. Your comments have been, as always, profound and provocative and interesting. And come back again in another 4 years for what I assume you assume will be the second inaugural of Ronald Reagan.
By acclamation.
Okay, thank you, George. We can go down now and join the other folks in the reviewing stand. Well, we have still quite a ways to go in the procession down to the White House. So our coverage of Inauguration 81 will continue in a moment.
Once upon a time, there was a little girl with a red bottom, which made her very unhappy. One day, a handsome prince came to her rescue. "I have a magic powder," he said. "It's Johnson's baby cornstarch. It's so absorbent, it helps soothe and prevent chafing and irritation." And her daddy was right. Her bottom felt better, her tears dried up, and they lived happily ever after with Johnson's baby cornstarch, the powder that works like magic, from Johnson & Johnson.
Special on pork chops? Charlie loves pork chops. That's a special?
Even on sale, good pork chops cost good money, so don't gamble. Get shake and bake coating mix. It makes the most of your pork chops. Look, the golden coating seals in the juices for plump, juicy pork chops at their tender best.
Charlie, flip for those pork chops, Pete.
Get shake and bake, regular or barbecue style. It makes the most of your pork chops.
Mr. Wells, I'll take this Cordaid cream. Marge, is your skin irritated too? We've been using new Lanacort. Lanacort? Hydrocortisone. It really works.
They're equally effective for eczema, rashes from dermatitis, and other minor skin irritations. And you can get both without a prescription. The big difference is Lanacort costs less.
Yeah, a lot less. I'm switching to Lanacort.
New Lanacort Hydrocortisone Cream from the makers of Lanacaine Cream.
Really effective and costs a lot less.
Ford Escort, a world car. Europe's Car of the Year 1981 award. Winner, the European Ford Escort. Road Test Magazine's Car of the Year 1981 award. Winner, the American Ford Escort. And the biggest win of all, Ford Escort, with front-wheel drive and four-wheel independent suspension, is now outselling every imported car line in America. Ford Escort, built to take on the world, and doing it.
Taxi guys take a mountain vacation.
Something ate all our foods. We're gonna die.
And end up in a mountain of trouble. And on soap, what did Maggie do to straighten out Jody?
There was nowhere to watch out.
And does Danny by the farm? There, a mystery in Vegas.
No murder weapon?
B, witnesses a killing.
No victim?
But when Dan checks it out,
no bloodstains.
There's not a trace of foul play.
Tonight, starting at 8, 7 Central and Mountain on ABC.
This is Frank Reynolds back once again at Capitol Hill, where just about everything is over as far as the inauguration is concerned. The president's motorcade is now moving down Pennsylvania Avenue, and you see it here with the flashing lights and the horns and so forth. And there are people jammed just about everywhere to try to get a glimpse of him as he makes his way. Boy, what a backdrop that is, huh? You still see the bunting on the west front of the Capitol. That will be removed very shortly. I want to go now, however, here is General Haig with Barbara, but we're not going to go to Barbara and General Haig just for the moment. I'm sure they will understand, because I want to go to Frankfurt, West Germany, where our correspondent Peter Jennings can bring us up to date on the latest news as far as the hostages. Peter? Frank, the drama of the now former hostages continues to unfold. The Algerian 7027 has now overflown Ankara in Turkey, which we thought might be a refueling stop, and is now headed towards Athens. There is a possibility it could overfly Athens and go straight onto Algiers. It's in a straight line. What we have had is the first eyewitness report from Tehran airport of what the hostages were like just minutes before they took off on this flight to freedom, and it comes from the Swiss ambassador, Eric Lang, the Swiss, of course, who represent American interests in Tehran. Half an hour before the takeoff, he said some of the hostages were seeing each other for the first time in 14 months, and the ambassador described it to ABC's Chris Powell as being almost childlike. They were laughing, he said, and crying, falling all over and hugging one another. They could not, he said. Many of them believed that in a half hour they were literally on their way to freedom. All of the hostages, with the exception of two, the ambassador said, looked to be in pretty good condition, but two of them did have difficulty walking. He said the older ones looked much older, in some cases 5, 6, and 10 years older, and he particularly referred to his, as he called him, his old friend Bruce Langan, the American charge d'affaires who'd been held at the Foreign Ministry for so many months and who had felt such deep regret at being separated from the rest of his employees at the embassy. But they are on their way, having overflown Ankara, perhaps overflowing Athens. The C-9s have taken off from Rhein-Main Air Force Base here to go and pick them up in Algiers. Frank? Thank you, Peter. My goodness, what a poignant story that is. To think that they met at the airport and probably did see one another for the first time in some 14 months. It leads you to believe that they really have been kept isolated and could not have, as Peter said, could not have believed they were on their way to freedom, quoting the Swiss ambassador. So it may have come as just the most welcome surprise that they could possibly imagine. Well, once again, we see the motorcade coming down Pennsylvania Avenue with President Reagan now inside the car, but I'm sure he'll be up very shortly. We're going to go back down to our anchor booth across the street from the White House, where Barbara Walters is waiting to talk with Secretary of State Designate Alexander Haig. Barbara?
Thank you, Frank. General Haig just ran across the street and has to go back very shortly when the parade begins, so we're going to ask some questions very quickly. General, when do you think that the former hostages will be in this country? When will they be coming home?
Well, I think it's too soon to say yet, Barbara. As you know, we will bring them to Rhein-Main and then to Wiesbaden, where they will undergo very careful physical examinations to be sure that they are ready indeed to come back and spend some time with their families. That could run from 3 to 7 days, perhaps.
As far as you're concerned, is the problem now over? Now a new administration, or are there still problems that continue?
Well, first, there are many problems that will continue, and that would involve the implementation of the agreements and accords that have been arrived at by the Carter administration. Now, we are prepared to deal with that. We've had a task force in place, this transition administration, if you will, and we hope to maintain the corporate memory of those who've done such fine work in the last few weeks.
Will any of the Carter people be staying on to sort of, you know, help you slide in and continue a transition
yes,
period?
in some instances there will be. And so
Warren Christopher, will he stay on for a
No,
while?
I don't anticipate that. But in other instances, we've had professionals involved, and they, of course, will stay on.
General, what's the lesson to be learned from this? It's really a two-part question. What have we learned, and any thoughts on what we do if this happens again with a terrorist nation?
Well, Barbara, without begging your question, I think today is a day for some gratification and celebration, and not a lot of post-mortem nitpicking. And I really prefer to reserve on that.
We just had a report from Frank that the Senate is going to take up your confirmation today. Have you heard that?
I've heard that. I don't know that it's so.
How do you feel about it? You hope
well,
it'll be
I
all
very
over
much
with?
welcome it. I'm very gratified by the results of the Foreign Relations Committee vote, and it bodes well for good partnership between myself and in a bipartisan way with the committee.
On this really quite jubilant day, as you look ahead, what do you think is the major problem confronting us in terms of foreign policy?
Well, I think, above all, establishing a degree of credibility in America once again abroad. And that in itself, I think, contributes greatly to international stability and world peace.
Thank you, General Haig, for being with us. Go back and enjoy the parade and
Good.
have one day of relaxation before new headaches begin.
Thank you.
We hope they take a long time in coming.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
Okay. Dr. Frank.
Thank you, General, and thank you, Barbara. The General is right in saying that he does not really anticipate any difficulty in the Senate confirmation. He's been all through that in the committee hearings. We're looking down now from across the White House to the parade coming down on Pennsylvania Avenue. We have a piece of, really a remarkable piece of videotape to show you that I think will probably go in the history packages, because it was made between 4 and 5 o'clock this morning when President Jimmy Carter was in the Oval Office preparing the speech that he intended to give today to announce the release of the hostages, when surrounded by his aides, Hamilton, Jordan, and there is the Vice President. Look at the fatigue on those faces and the casual. The phone is going to ring, and it's going to be a telephone call from Treasury Secretary G. William Miller. Now, just watch what happens.
What's the time?
Yeah, right on, man. That's great. That's great. Okay, now the next step then. So that'll go to Algiers, and Algiers, when they notify Iran, will notify us back, right? That's good.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's good to see you.
Congratulations.
Yeah, I think that belongs in the history books, or in the wherever they put videotapes to preserve them for time. The President receiving the word from Treasury Secretary G. William Miller on the telephone that was it, that the hostages actually, the final agreement had been reached, and that they were going to be released. And Secretary of State Muskie, not exactly in diplomatic striped pants and cutaway, walking over to congratulating him and meaning every word of it. Well, we'll continue with our parade. Here it is coming down Pennsylvania Avenue. They're at 11th and Pennsylvania. They've already gone by the Justice Department building, and on the other side of that, of course, was the perhaps the biggest building in the whole street there, the J. Edgar Hoover FBI building. But they're coming down at a very slow pace, naturally, and it's obvious they're getting a very friendly reception. We saw a few demonstrators before. Here is the President giving the wave to the throng. We'll see much more of that this afternoon, so we're going to pause for a moment. Our coverage of Inauguration 81 will continue after this message and a word from our local stations.
Running this ski lodge is a family affair. We've all got our jobs to do. And when one of us gets a cold or flu,
I have to take this up to Daddy. Okay.
the rest of us do worry.
Here, he'll like this.
But we've got our Bayer. For aches, sore throat pain, and fever, nothing we can buy beats Bayer. For us, it's rest, fluids, and Bayer aspirin, the only pain reliever our family uses.
Good morning.
Dad, look at you.
For your family's aches, pains, and fever, all you need is Bayer.
You did it! You did it!
Not me. My sister did.
We make Cheerios low in sugar. Kids made Cheerios #1. You did it!
I did it?
Toasty oat goodness is what we've got. 1 gram of sugar, not a lot.
I'm glad Cheerios is my kid's favorite cereal. Those tasty toasted O's have been part of our good breakfast for years.
You did it! We make Cheerios low in sugar. Kids made Cheerios #1.
Inauguration coverage plus the latest on the hostages tomorrow on Good Morning America.
When it snows, there are a lot of serious problems. For instance, whether to wear your beard inside or outside, whether to send the dog out for the paper or go get it yourself. Oh, yes, and whether to send the kids to school. Well, if you want information this year on county schools, city schools, public schools, private schools, parochial schools, even nursery schools, tune into 2. Brought to you this year by Frank Davis Buick, Kentucky Fried Chicken, and American Ace Coffee. So tune into 2, and we can tell you the information whether to go yay or boo.
It's the biggest country show of the year when Dennis Weaver reviews the best country music of 1980 with Tanya Tucker,
Houston starts to feel like Lone Star Hell.
Mickey Gelly, Conway Twitty, Ann Murray, Ronnie Millsap, Dolly Parton, Eddie Rabbitt, Crystal Gale, Johnny Lee, Merle Haggard, the Oak Ridge Boys, and more. 2 hours of non-stop hits, Country Countdown 1980.
Friday night at 8 on TV2.
You're watching WNGE-TV Channel 2, Nashville.
ABC News live coverage of Inauguration 81 continues.
Here is the parade. They are on Pennsylvania Avenue at approximately 14th and Pennsylvania, I believe. And the President and Mrs. Reagan waving to the crowd. These are the people who are now in the bleachers. They've paid for the privilege of seeing this, if I'm correct. Yes. The photographer's truck moving ahead of them, and all the Secret Service and the other apparatus of the presidential protection moving along with them. The rain has not yet started to come down, and perhaps it won't. So that they'll end the day in perfect order. And the Vice President and Mrs. Bush also obviously having a pretty good time. And indeed, why not? They still have some distance to go before they make the turn there on 15th Street and go by the old Treasury building and then finally up onto Pennsylvania Avenue again and straight down past the White House to the reviewing stand. I want to call in now my colleague Sandy Van Oker, who has been watching all of this today and providing some very insightful commentary on the proceedings. And Sandy, what are your final thoughts? Because we're about all wrapped up here. We're among the has-beens as far as the inaugural coverage is concerned. They've left us.
Frank, 20 years ago, I saw the youngest man ever inaugurated president, John F. Kennedy, make a speech that filled me and many of his countrymen with great exhilaration. Today, I saw the oldest man ever inaugurated president of the United States make a speech that I think will be seen by his countrymen as a new beginning, just as a speech in 1960 was. I think he has enormous potential. He's always been a great politician, a great politician. We've always underestimated him, but he's been great. Now he has a chance, and I think today was the beginning to become a statesman.
And he has, Sandy, that so important attribute of any political leader, but particularly of a president, the ability to articulate the issues as he sees them and to explain to the country what needs to be done. Boy, that's
I hate to end with a cliche, Frank. He is a great communicator.
Yes, yes, he is. Thank you very much, Sandy. It's been great fun. And certainly been great fun, too, to be able to do this, knowing that all the time the American hostages were actually finally gaining their release. Not to put too fine a point on it, but amidst all this panoply and pageantry and so forth, I think it's useful to remember that the true grandeur of all this ceremony comes not from the marching bands and the horses and the waving and all the other stuff, but just from those 35 words that the president speaks. John Kennedy was right 20 years ago today when he said that we celebrate not the triumph of freedom, but not the triumph of party, but the triumph of freedom and of the continuing process, the constitutional process that has enabled this country to go right on, maintaining this democratic tradition and renewing itself each time as it does. So that's the true grandeur compressed into one tiny slice of time amidst all this pageantry and welcome and beautiful though it may be. Now I'm going to turn things over to Ted Koppel and Barbara Walters, who are down where the action is really beginning to unfold across the street from the White House, where the parade will very shortly be going by. Ted, Barbara, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Frank, and it's a delight to be here with Barbara overlooking the White House. This is where the uptown folks are. They've paid up to $100 a ticket just to be sitting where we are, but the parade has not yet reached that point, and therefore, obviously, neither has the president. First he comes to the White House, and then he will be taking his place on the reviewing stand. The parade should very shortly be reaching the position of our colleague Bettina Gregory, who is located at 15th and Pennsylvania.
I think that we're going to Bettina now. I thought we might be doing something else first. Can you tell us if we're going to be going first to Plains? Yes, we are. We are first, Ted, going to Plains. We don't have the best picture, but it will get better. It's not your set. And we will see Jimmy Carter emerging, we think, in just a moment from his helicopter back to his hometown of Plains, where they're having a rainy day. Well, we're going to come back. We're going to clean up our picture, and then we're going to come back. And it's good to see you. You've had a long
Thank you.
evening.
Now we're going to clean up our act,
Now
right?
we'll clean up our act. We'll pull it all together
All right,
here, right?
the vanguard of the parade is now passing behind us. It's the D.C. police who are leading this whole thing in kind of a flying wedge. We've been seeing them from that high shot. but the president is still some blocks away from here.
You know, we should say, we haven't talked much about finances, and there's been so much talking about it before, that this whole thing isn't costing the taxpayers anything. I mean, true, it is costing anywhere between $8 million and $10 million, this inauguration, and that's no small sum, but the money is being raised by contributions and souvenirs and all these different seats that are being sold. And when you see the different units in the parade, they have all paid their own expenses to come here from different parts of the world. What a traffic jam. I could use one of the policemen there. The parade is going to be divided into different sections of the country with marching bands from the Northeast, the South, Middle America, and the West. Everybody's going to get a chance to celebrate.
Now, of course, the reason they're doing it by region, Barbara, is because they wanted to keep the length of this parade down. Some of these parades have gone on for hours. They are going to try and keep this one to within 1 hour. And so rather than letting a band or a float represent each of the 50 states, they have decided to do it by the regions. And just to continue the point you were making about the expense, it is enormously expensive, or at least it can be enormously expensive, to be here where the folks are on the stands. The most expensive seats, they're right behind us, and to the left and right of the reviewing stand are $100 a piece, but even the cheapest seats that are within several blocks of here, and I don't think these folks are going to see very much, are about $15, $20, $25. But all of this is necessary to raise the $11 to $10 million you were talking about.
Even the grandstand, the wooden grandstand, when this is all over, that grandstand is going to be broken up, and you can buy a sliver and a piece of lucite. I think it's $28. Everything that they can get their hands on is going to be sold. I may put you up for auction when this program's over, Ted, and see how much we can bid.
$26.50 maximum.
The president has an escort service. The different marching groups that you see him with are part of an escort service. That's not part of the actual parade. The actual parade does not begin until the president and vice president are in their stands and with their family and their friends and the cabinet members, and everybody's all ready for the parade to begin.
Of course, communities all around the country, these bands themselves may have not had enough money to warrant coming here to Washington, but communities all around the country have raised funds so that their bands could come here. And the first of the marching bands is now moving directly behind us. Looks like an army band.
Ted, we're going to go to Bettina Gregory. She's got a little more for us. She's right out there with the folks. Tina?
I'm right here on the Treasury. See the president is up. Turn. It is that while president had the hospital.
Bettina, I'm afraid, is breaking up rather badly, and so we'll get back to her as soon as we get that technical problem solved. It is the U.S. Army Band marching by.
While the caissons go rolling along, you can't miss that. This is all part of the presidential escort. All the military units are represented. Each military unit has its own band and its own group. Not one has been left out.
Of course, directly behind us, just about 50 yards across the street, is what has now become the power establishment. Some of them have been in that role before, but they're in it again. These are the movers and shakers of Washington these days. They are going to be surrounding the president when he gets here. That will still be a few minutes. But the military segments of this parade are moving by right now. It's amazing how quickly power is transferred in this city, isn't it?
It's interesting. Ronald Reagan got 300 tickets himself for this parade. It's funny to believe that he had to ask or get tickets. He got 100 tickets for the swearing in, 300 tickets for the parade, and we hear no tickets for the ball. He could just go with his wife, but his friends had to buy the tickets.
That's fair.
But in the grandstand are our personal friends, as well as cabinet members and the two Supreme Court justices and everybody, friends, family, and the power hierarchy all together.
You know, so much of our time, Barbara, today has been spent on focusing on the Iran story that we haven't really had that much of an opportunity to draw the contrasts between this inauguration and the one that took place 4 years ago. At that time, as you recall, Jimmy Carter was determined to demonstrate that the presidency was not that almighty a job, and it was time to humble the job a little bit and bring it down to the people's level. And so 4 years ago, he was walking down Pennsylvania Avenue with his wife Rosalind and Amy, and of course, he immediately gave orders that he wasn't going to be riding around in that huge limousine. This is a totally different group, and President Reagan has absolutely no qualms about wielding and indeed demonstrating the great power of the American presidency. And these folks who are peopling Washington today and lining both sides of the street, these are, for the most part, people who have absolutely no hesitation about demonstrating the fact that this is a wealthy country and they are among the cream.
It's Limousine City. We mentioned very earlier this morning what Mrs. Reagan was wearing. In case you didn't hear it, I'll just tell you again. Frank was giving a few fashion notes before, which gave me a chuckle. Mrs. Reagan is wearing an orange coat, dress, and hat designed by Adolfo, probably made to order for her. She's a perfect size 6. Adolfo is a Cuban-born designer in New York, very fine designer, and Mrs. Reagan gets a great many of her clothes from him. And an outfit like this, if you went to buy it from him, would probably cost something under $2,000, about $1,700. And you remember Mrs. Carter wearing her blue coat and her black boots and priding herself on buying things off the rack, not caring about fashion. The fashion industry is delighted that they have Mrs. Reagan. They feel that it will be like Jacqueline Kennedy, that it will be wonderful for the fashion industry, the 5th largest industry in the country, and that it's a sign of what they hope will be increasing prosperity for America.
Well, again, that was part of the symbolism of the Carters, too, 4 years ago, that Mrs. Carter made the point of wearing the same dress that she had worn when her husband was inaugurated as governor of Georgia.
Right, 6 years before his presidential inauguration.
But it is very much a different tone that is being brought to this city today. And I must say, President Reagan, it probably won't take very long to get used to that at all. He seems to the manner born, doesn't he?
And you know, a little while ago when Mrs. Jack Rather, Benita Granville, was on with us, she said, we're not ashamed of this. She said, our husbands are self-made men. This is the American way.
Well, the president-elect is just about to move. His limousine is just about to move directly behind us, behind this booth, and he will pass his own reviewing stand. What they're going to do, we can see the president-elect and Mrs. Reagan, as we've been able to see them on television all along. But now they're moving directly behind us, and their cabinet members and their friends are waving at them and applauding them as they themselves pass in review.
That must be a wonderful feeling. Now they're waving. Should we wave, Ted? We can.
Well, why not?
He's waving right at us, but I don't think he sees us. We're waving.
What they'll be doing now is hooking around behind the White House, and then eventually the president will come out of the White House and will walk across the North Lawn and come in the back door of that reviewing stand. It'll probably take about 5 or 6 minutes to complete that process, and then he will stand here as the actual inaugural parade goes by.
You hear the crowd cheering. Those are the $100 seaters cheering away. We see a lot. Look, if you look out the window, Ted, I don't know whether our cameras can... Oh, there's George Bush and Mrs. Bush receiving some cheers, and the Vice President waving a little American flag. Cheers to the crowd. Good, happy moment.
All right. I'm not sure which of us did that, but one of us called him president-elect. It was probably me. He's not. He's president.
He is president.
Has been for several hours now.
As he said last night, it had sunk in. It's going to take a little while for it to sink in with us, and then we'll start calling him
Now,
president.
there's the vice president and Mrs. Bush, and he's obviously enjoying himself enormously.
What we're seeing on our cameras, however, is the president. Ted's looking out of the window. No fun. You're supposed to be looking at
there he is. Now they're seeing the same thing.
Yeah, you can't just sit here and enjoy yourself, Ted. There we go.
Incidentally, we should let you know that as soon as the former hostages make it land in the free world, and my understanding is they're going to...
We're going to be going to President Carter. Excuse me, Ted. President Carter arriving in Plains, Georgia.
We can make the point as we watch the president being greeted by his family and fellow townspeople of Plains that as soon as the former hostages land, and our understanding is they're going to land at a U.S. military base outside Athens, Greece, we will, of course, bring you those first pictures.
Barry Serafin is there, Ted, and will give us a report, a first-hand report of what's happening. Barry?
What?
We have a hometown music. We're waiting for Barry to come in and tell us exactly what's happening there. While the president has some time at home, We can't seem to reach Barry. How long is he going to be here now, Ted, before he takes off again?
Very few hours. I think only a couple of hours because, in fact, I remember Tom Jarrell interviewing former Secretary of State Muskie. Now the former President Carter is kissing his mother. You can probably see her just under that blue and white umbrella. It's probably raining in planes. Again, there's nothing wrong with your sets. That's a breakup of our satellite picture from planes.
She's been quite ill.
That'll settle in. She has been ill, but
got a broken hip.
She's there to greet him. And he will be coming back here to Washington and then leaving at 8 o'clock Eastern Time this evening from Andrews Air Force Base for the flight over to Frankfurt.
While this is happening, we see the Reagans going behind the White House. As Ted told us, they will go behind, and then they will come down and take their seat on the reviewing stand.
They're passing the Executive Office building on the left now, and they'll be looking around to the left behind it.
It's such a contrast, isn't it, Ted? I mean, sometimes you have to say the obvious because you look at the former president arriving on a rainy day, a smallish crowd in planes, and then all of this as the transfer of power continues, this great big parade here.
All right, Barbara, our coverage of Inauguration 81 continues in a moment.
I got my A's.
I got my B's.
We've got our E's.
Got my C and D.
I get Myadec because I want more for me.
Myadec, 11 vitamins and 6 minerals. More potency than the other leading multivitamins with minerals.
I got my manganese, magnesium, my copper, and my zinc.
My niacin and iodine.
Iron. I get Myadec because I want more for me.
From Park Davis.
Nice party, wasn't it?
All of a sudden it just took off. These pictures are terrific. The doctor operating.
Oh, the dancing girls.
Ah, the klutz.
When you have a party that won't start, just take some pictures with the one-step and new Time Zero Supercolor and watch what happens. Hey, the road to Mandalay.
I didn't know you could sing.
Did it sound like a trained voice?
Sounded like a trained seal.
Polaroid's one step. It makes its own fun.
Or a sick moose.
Time Zero.
Now you see it, now you don't. Here you have it, here you won't. Oh, Diet Pepsi, 1 small calorie. Now you see it, now you don't. That great Pepsi taste. Diet Pepsi won't go to your waist. So now you see it, now you know. Oh, Diet Pepsi, 1 small calorie. Now you see it, now you don't.
Make your hair come alive. I'm Brooke Shields, and I love Wella Balsam because it makes your hair come alive with shine, with that strong, healthy look. My hair takes a real beating, but Wella Balsam brings it right back. Hey, if you're not happy with your hair, get with Wella Balsam Instant Conditioner and make your hair come alive.
All right, President Reagan has just emerged from his limousine. He has entered the south entrance of the White House, is now moving through the White House itself, will be exiting on the north portico, and then I think you'll be able to see a picture. There you see it now, that blue road that appears to be coming out of the right-hand side of your picture is actually blue planks that have been laid down, and President Reagan will be coming along that walkway and then entering the back of the reviewing stand. He's in the White House right now. And there, of course, you see the reviewing stand itself.
And in the reviewing stand, as we said, are cabinet members, members of the family, a great many friends assembled, all kind of mixed up together. And the president and the vice president and their wives will be sitting in the first row, along eventually with General Omar Bradley, who is the Grand Marshal of this parade at age 87, and he will be sitting right in the front row with the president and vice president.
I should point out that the actual parade has not yet begun, so that will last, it is scheduled to last 59 minutes. It obviously will not begin. It's in a holding pattern right now, waiting for the president to show up, and he will move there where you see the presidential seal. He'll be sitting almost directly behind that seal, or will be standing, I assume, for much of this parade to wave to the marchers.
On one side of the stand is the California flag, and the other side is the Texas flag. In front of the stand, there are police about every 9 yards, and that's bulletproof glass that you just had a glimpse of. Last time it was solar heated. Do you remember, Ted, when President Carter stood in the reviewing stand? It is not solar heated today.
It's actually a very balmy day here in Washington today. I just walked over from our bureau, and while it's gray and cloudy, there comes the president now out the north portico, and he'll be walking along that pathway. You can see he's got a coat on now.
You know that I read somewhere that it's 56 degrees, by the way. To us Easterners, Northerners, that's frightfully warm. But I read that Mrs. Reagan kept shivering because these Californians are going to have to get used to our weather. And we see a lot of fur coats, by the way, in that reviewing stand.
I also think I see Susan King. Yeah.
Typical of the way they handle it.
I don't really know.
Thank you very much, President. That, of course, is President Reagan going down the front steps this morning. This afternoon, he just stopped to speak with us for a few moments. It didn't want to say too much, obviously, about the goings-on the Iranians. It's the first time he has been able to comment on them. Would only say that it did seem typical, the kind of timing when the hostages were released. He was being pulled by aides to not comment further, and of course will now be leaving to go over to enjoy the parade. It's been a very interesting afternoon here at the White House. It's been quite a change of power and some confusion at that moment.
And there it is, hail to the chief. The President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, about to look at his celebration parade. Looks like he's very chilly, Ted, with a scarf and a coat.
Well, now he's shaking hands with Mayor Barry of Washington. Marion Barry, the mayor of the city, who was somewhat concerned about Ronald Reagan becoming president and expressed those concerns in no uncertain terms during the campaign. But like all politicians, he knows that accommodations have to be made. Most of these people, however, you can see Richard Allen in the background there, the president's national security advisor. Most of these people are friends and advisors.
Ted, I'm not sure, but you see that little baby? I think that's the president's only grandson. I can't quite see, but it seems to me he's being there. Sure he is. He's being held by the president's son. Is that the
Mike.
Baby? Sure. That's
Mike
the
is
2-year-old
holding him,
grandson.
Mike Reagan.
It's his first inauguration parade at 2 years old. That's quite a treat. President Reagan's 4 children, President and Mrs. Reagan's 4 children are there, 2 by his first marriage, and the 2 together, and the 5 Bush children.
Well, it should begin to happen momentarily now that the president and the first lady are in place, waving to their friends. Just around the corner, the inaugural parade is ready to begin.
On either side of the president are members of the, as you go out on the wings of the stand, are members of the cabinet. Some former members there as well. We saw Dr. Henry Kissinger and his wife a few moments ago, just before you arrived, Ted.
Looks as though someone left a 10-gallon hat for the president, and he seems to be debating whether to wear it or to pass it off.
This parade, the president said he wanted it short and snappy. They have military units with the parade to make sure that the marchers march quickly enough, and if they don't and they dawdle, I can't quite make out what it says in that hat. If they dawdle, they've got people on either side to give them a little boost. If they dawdle too much, they will be taken out of the parade. Yep. But I don't think anyone's going to dawdle too much. You know, there had been a little drama here. One of the members of the parade is an Alaskan dog team coming from the farthest away point, Alaska, and the dog team had been kidnapped. Did you hear that?
I did. Now here, by contrast, Barbara, is what it looks like when you're out of power. That's Plains, Georgia. It is drizzling, but the townspeople of Plains have come out to express their warm sentiments to their native son. And you can see former President Carter as he's shaking hands with his friends. Wearing a raincoat, but hatless. Most people there with umbrellas and hats. He's going to be here, as we told you earlier, just for a couple of hours before he heads back here to Washington, and then on with most members of his staff, National Security Council, several of his cabinet members. They will be going on this evening at 8 o'clock, flying to Frankfurt, Germany, so that they can be in place to, well, they won't be in place to greet the hostages when they arrive. The hostages will get there before they do. But they will be in place to meet with them all tomorrow. President Carter, former President Carter, looking very cheerful. This cannot have been an easy day for him, but he has carried himself with great grace and style.
And then, eventually, he says, he will come back to live in Plains. And now here we are, back in Washington, at the viewing stand. Mrs. Bush, now, as you can see, just coming down to take her place next to her husband.
And the lead elements of the inaugural parade are getting ready to come by, so pretty soon we can stop filling here, and we can start showing you some of the pageantry of this great event.
But first, we'll have this pretty look at Mrs. Reagan, and then we will tell you that our coverage of Inauguration 81 will continue in a moment, back with the parade after this message and a word from our local stations.
Presenting the fruit, the whole fruit, and nothing but the fruit, with no sugar added. Libby Light Fruits. Fresh fruit with no sugar added in a flavored blend of real fruit juices.
A delicious fresh fruit taste.
Fresh fruit and real fruit juices. Tastes great.
Natural tasting without all the sugar. That's Light.
Libby Light Peaches, Pears, and Fruit Cocktail. There's no sugar added. So you taste the fruit, the whole fruit, and nothing but the fruit.
It's everywhere. Deep underground, under the ocean, in tight rock formations, in coal, in waste, even in plants. It's methane. You know it as natural gas. Clean, remarkably efficient gas energy can come from many sources, which is why gas can continue to be America's #1 domestic energy source in the future. But it still makes sense to use all energies wisely today.
This is ABC in Nashville, WNGE TV2.
Now, on the planet Earth, Burger King presents the Empire Strikes Back Super Scene Collection. Action-filled mini-stamps that tell the story of R2-D2, Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker, and more. First week, get a folder when you buy a regular-size Coke. Each visit, get 12 mini-stamps free. The Empire Strikes Back Super Scene Collection. Only at Burger King.
Ever think you could buy a late model large screen color portable TV for only $168? You can now at Holiday Inn North, Trinity Lane and I-65. Holiday Inns at other institutions are replacing their color TVs, and Mid-South has brought them to Nashville for sale. All have been under service contract and are in excellent condition. You heard right. Late model large screen portables for only $168, or 19-inch black and whites for $39.95. Terms are cash and carry, Visa or MasterCharge. 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. daily at Holiday Inn North, Trinity Lane and I-65 in Nashville.
You're watching WNGE TV Channel 2, Nashville.
ABC News live coverage of Inauguration 81 continues.
Well, we're back here, Ted Koppel and I. We have ringside seats, and you can enjoy them with us as we start to watch the parade. Right behind us, the parade stand, and Mrs. Reagan, at this very moment, is she's talking to her daughter, Patty, from what I can see. And the president was just a moment ago talking to his Secretary of State designate, Alexander Haig. Now he's walking around saying hello to his children who are seated in the front row. That's his daughter, and next to his daughter-in-law, I think the president is blocking him, and his son, not in morning suit, but in street clothes, and then his sister-in-law and his brother Neil, otherwise known as Moon, because he used to love Moon Mullins. So that's the immediate family behind the president, Mrs. Reagan.
Passing in front of the president, the first unit, the equestrian unit, the U.S. Park Police Horse Unit from Washington, D.C., and they are leading off this inaugural parade. Now the president and the first lady are in place to view their parade.
Each of these parade units, as we've said, have been divided into different groups, and what you're seeing now is each of them has a military escort ahead of them. You're going to be seeing the bands from the northeast, but before that will be a great many military units before the actual youngsters come out and do their number. I believe that this is the General of the Army, Omar Bradley, in that car we just saw in that limousine. He is the Grand Marshal of the 1981 inaugural parade, 5-star general.
He graduated from West Point back in 1915.